Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the course for tonight, which is SOAR Investigation and Just Culture Workshop. It's just some house rules. You know that my name is Dave Bolter. I'm the EMA for Gliding Australia. And tonight, if you can, there'll be some interactive work that we will do. And if you can put your answers in the chat or the Q&A, it doesn't matter which one you put it in, I'll see that and be able to feed that back to Chris as we're going through the course. And if you've got any questions, really, let's leave them to the end, where there'll be a major Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I'll introduce Chris now. So Chris Thorpe is running our course for us tonight. Chris is the former executive manager of operations. He was my predecessor and friend. And he has an extensive experience in aviation safety, training, gliding operations management. He also has a really large experience in working on accidents and incidents. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Chris, and I'll hand the meeting over to you.
All right, thanks, Dave, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us. So tonight marks the first session in our SOAR Investigation and Just Culture Workshop series. So whether you're an instructor, club safety officer, committee member, investigator, or simply someone with an interest in improving aviation safety, I hope you'll find something in tonight's discussion that changes the way you think about accidents and incidents. But before we begin, I'd just like to make one thing very clear. This is not a course designed to turn people into professional accident investigators. Professional investigations require structured training, experience, and disciplined methods. Club investigators may not have that level of specialist preparation, but they can still apply sound investigation principles in a careful, fair, and evidence-based way. So instead, tonight is about improving the way we respond when something goes wrong. Now, almost every aviation occurrence, whether it's a ground handling injury, a damaged glider, a serious incident, or a fatal accident, it begins with ordinary club members finding themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Those first few minutes matter. The decisions made during that period often determine not only how effectively the emergency is managed, but also whether the organisation learns the right lessons afterwards. So throughout tonight, we're going to examine what good practice looks like during those early stages. We'll discuss how to respond professionally, how to preserve evidence, how to report occurrences effectively, and how to avoid many of the common mistakes that unintentionally undermine investigations. You'll notice that there are several themes that will keep appearing throughout the evening. The first is learning rather than blame. Whenever something goes wrong, human nature encourages us to ask who caused this. But modern aviation safety has shown that this is often the least useful question. Instead, we should be asking, how did this happen? Why did it make sense to the people involved at the time? What conditions allowed it to occur? And perhaps more importantly, what can we learn to stop it happening again? Our second recurring theme is evidence rather than speculation. People naturally want answers quickly. After an occurrence, rumours spread remarkably fast. Witnesses begin talking to one another. People form opinions based on incomplete information. Before long, a narrative develops, and sometimes that narrative becomes accepted as fact long before the evidence has been properly examined. One of the marks of a professional investigator is the discipline to resist that temptation. Good investigators become comfortable saying, "We don't know yet." That isn't weakness, it's professionalism. Our third theme is systems thinking rather than simplistic pilot error. Many investigations fail because they stop at the first obvious human mistake. Yes, pilots do make errors, but so do instructors, managers, engineers, organisations, procedures, training systems. Safety management is about understanding how all of those factors interact. Finally, we'll talk about maintaining professionalism under pressure. Most club investigations occur within small communities where everyone knows each other. The pilot might be your instructor, your student, your friend, your committee colleague. That creates challenges that professional investigators working outside the organisation don't necessarily face. Remaining objective in that environment requires conscious discipline. Throughout tonight, I encourage you to think about your own club. Don't simply ask yourself whether your written procedures look good. Ask yourself whether they would actually work when emotions are high, people are distressed, and decisions need to be made quickly. So some of the best learning in workshops like this comes from discussion rather than from the slides themselves. So let's begin by looking at what we hope to achieve during tonight's session. So tonight's session has 6 practical objectives. By the end of the session, participants should have a practical understanding of 6 main areas. The first is the purpose of SOAR. SOAR is not just an administrative reporting system, and it is not simply a place where incidents disappear into a database. Its purpose is to support safety learning. A single report may seem minor on its own, but when reports are collected and reviewed properly, they help the organisation identify patterns, recurring hazards, training weaknesses, procedural drift, and areas where supervision or communication may need improvement. The second objective is to understand just culture principles. This is central to everything we will discuss tonight. A just culture is not blame-free culture. It does not mean that anything goes. It means that people are treated fairly, that honest mistakes are distinguished from reckless behaviour, and that the organisation looks carefully at the system around the person before reaching judgment. The third objective is to understand immediate response priorities. When something happens, particularly a serious incident or accident, the first few minutes are often confused and emotional. People may be trying to help, trying to understand what happened, trying to contact others, or trying to keep operations moving. In that environment, priorities matter. Life comes first. Then the situation needs to be stabilised. Then evidence needs to be preserved where possible. Then appropriate notification needs to occur. So the fourth objective is to understand the basics of evidence preservation. This does not mean turning club members into forensic investigators. It means recognising that early actions can either protect or destroy valuable information. Moving aircraft, cleaning up damage, allowing witnesses to discuss the events together, or failing to record what was changed can all make the later investigation harder. The fifth objective is to recognise common investigation pitfalls. These include hindsight bias, confirmation bias, emotional involvement, conflicts of interest, early speculation, and simplistic pilot error explanations. Most investigation errors are not deliberate. They arise because investigators are human. Good investigation practice requires us to recognise those traps and manage them deliberately. And the final objective is to understand evidence-based analysis. Good investigations do not begin with a conclusion and then search for evidence to support it. They begin with disciplined fact gathering. Only after the evidence has been collected should we start asking what it means. That distinction is critical. Tonight's workshop is therefore not just about filling out reports, it's about improving the way we think, respond, investigate, and learn. So as we work through the presentation, keep these 6 objectives in mind. They form the structure for the whole session. Understand SOAR, apply a just culture, respond effectively, preserve evidence, avoid investigation traps, and base conclusions on evidence rather than assumption. Let's begin with the central reason we investigate. When people hear the word investigation, they often think immediately about blame, fault, discipline, or legal consequences. But that is not the primary purpose of a safety investigation. The primary purpose is to prevent future accidents. That is the first and most important point. A good investigation is not mainly about explaining the past, it's about protecting the future. If all we do is identify who made the last mistake, then we may have answered one narrow question, but we may not have made the organisation any safer. The real value of an investigation is that it helps us understand how the events became possible, what conditions existed, what hazards were present, what controls failed, what pressures influenced behaviour, what warning signs may have been missed, What would need to change to stop the same thing happening again? That leads directly to the second point. Investigations help us improve systems. Most aviation occurrences are not caused by one isolated failure. They usually involve a combination of factors: training, procedures, supervision, communication, weather, workload, culture, equipment, decision making, and local operating practices. If an investigation stops at the pilot made an error, it has probably stopped too early. The more useful question is, why was that error possible? Was the procedure clear? Was the training adequate? Was supervision effective? Was the operating environment creating pressure? Had a risky practice become normal over time? Those are system questions. They are the questions that lead to meaningful safety improvement. The third point is identify hazards. One of the most valuable things an investigation can do is reveal a hazard before it causes a worse outcome. Sometimes a minor incident is actually a gift. A ground handling injury, a runway incursion, a circuit conflict, a launch point misunderstanding, a radio confusion, or a near miss may all reveal something important. Nobody may have been seriously hurt, the aircraft may not have been badly damaged, but the event may still expose a weakness that, under slightly different circumstances, could have produced a much more serious result. Good organisations treat those events as early warnings. Poor organisations dismiss them as bad luck, isolated mistakes, or just one of those things. The fourth point is improved training. Investigations often reveal that people were doing exactly what they had been taught, or exactly what they had seen others do. That is why training is such an important part of safety learning. If an occurrence shows that pilots are uncertain about circuit priorities, radio procedures, launch point coordination, crosswind limits, field landing judgment, or emergency response, then the right response may not simply be to criticise the individual pilot. The better response may be to improve training, briefing, supervision, or standardisation. The fifth point is support organisational learning. This is where SOAR becomes very important. A single report may seem small, but several similar reports can reveal a trend. One club may experience a runway conflict. Another may report poor radio discipline. Another may report a similar sequencing issue. Individually, those events may look unrelated. Collectively, they show that a wider training or procedural issue exists. That is organisational learning. It means the organisation learns from the experience of its members rather than waiting for a serious accident before acting. And the final point on the slide is protect future pilots. This is a powerful way to think about investigation. The people involved in an occurrence have already experienced the event. We cannot change that. But we can use what happened to protect the next pilot, the next student, the next instructor, the next duty crew, and the next club that may face the same conditions. That is why investigation matters. It's not about punishment. It's not about embarrassment. It's not about producing paperwork for its own sake. It's about learning in a disciplined way so that future pilots do not have to discover the same hazards by being hurt by them. So a good investigation should do at least one of these things: prevent future accidents, improve systems, identify hazards, improve training, support organisational learning, or protect future pilots. If it does none of these things, we should ask whether we have really investigated or whether we have simply documented an event. We also need to recognise the realities of club operations. Most gliding clubs genuinely care about safety. They are full of people who volunteer their time, support each other, teach each other, maintain aircraft, run operations, and keep the sport functioning. That community spirit is one of gliding's greatest strengths. But when something goes wrong, that same close community can make investigation more difficult. The first challenge known here is emotional reactions. After an accident or serious incident, people may be shocked, upset, embarrassed, angry, or defensive. That is completely human. The pilot involved may be a friend. The instructor may be someone we respect. The person injured may be someone we well know. In that environment, people often react emotionally before they think analytically. That does not make them bad investigators. It makes them human. But it does mean we need a disciplined process to slow things down. The second challenge is rumour and speculation. In clubs, information travels quickly. Before anyone has gathered evidence, people may already be discussing what they think happened. Someone heard something on the radio. Someone saw part of the circuit. Someone spoke to a witness. Someone else fills in the gaps. Very quickly, a story forms. The danger is that story can become accepted before it has been tested. Once that happens, witnesses may unconsciously adjust their own recollections to fit the developing narrative. That is why early, independent fact gathering is so important. The third challenge is protecting reputations. This can be uncomfortable to talk about, but it matters. Sometimes people soften or avoid findings because they do not want to embarrass a pilot, instructor, club, committee, or organisation. They may worry about conflict. They may worry about external criticism. They may also worry about how the event will reflect on the club. But if we protect reputations at the expense of learning, the safety system fails. The most credible organisations are not those that pretend nothing goes wrong. They are the organisations that respond honestly and professionally when something does go wrong. The fourth challenge is premature conclusions. This is one of the most common investigation failures. People want answers quickly. They want to know who was at fault. They want closure. But early conclusions can be dangerous because they shape what investigators look for. Once we decide too early that an event was caused by, say, poor pilot judgment, we may stop looking carefully at training, procedures, supervision, workload, communication, weather, or operational culture. The investigation narrows too soon. The fifth challenge is limited experience. Many club investigations are conducted by capable and well-intentioned people, but they may not have formal investigation training. They may be excellent pilots, instructors, or administrators, but investigation is a separate skill. It requires evidence discipline, interviewing technique, bias awareness, report structure, and the ability to separate fact from interpretation. We should not assume that flying experience alone automatically makes someone an effective investigator. And the final challenge is fear of blame. If members believe that reporting an occurrence will automatically lead to criticism, embarrassment, or punishment, they will become less open. They may delay reporting. They may minimise what happened. They may avoid documenting uncomfortable details. Or they may say nothing at all. That is extremely damaging because the organisation then loses visibility of risk. So the message from this slide is not that clubs are poor at safety. The message is that clubs operate in a difficult social environment. People know each other, people care about each other, people want to protect the organisation. Those are understandable human responses. But good safety investigation requires us to manage those pressures deliberately. We need a process that protects people, preserves facts, reduces speculation, and keeps the focus on learning. That is why professionalism matters so much in club investigations. One of the most important traps in any investigation is hindsight bias. Now, hindsight bias occurs when we judge past decisions using knowledge that was not available to the person at the time. The graphic on the right captures the problem well. Once we know the outcome, the path looks clear. We can see where the flight ended. We can see what decisions did not work. We can see what the pilot should have done differently. But the pilot did not have that view. They were not looking backwards from the outcome. They were looking forwards from inside the cockpit with incomplete information, changing conditions, workload, pressure, and uncertainty. And that is the key point. Knowing the outcome changes perception. After an accident or incident, people often say things like, they should have known. It was obvious. I would never have done that. But we need to be very careful with those statements. They may feel true after the event, but they may not reflect what the situation actually looked like at the time. For example, after a landing accident, it may seem obvious that the pilot should have abandoned the approach earlier. But at the time, the pilot may have been managing traffic, wind, radio calls, aircraft energy, instructor input, or passenger stress, or pressure to reach the normal landing area. The approach may have deteriorated gradually. The pilot may not have recognised the seriousness of the situation until late, or they may have recognised the problem but believed the available options were limited. That does not mean we excuse poor decisions. It means we try to understand them properly before judging them. The second point on the slide is that decisions may have made sense at the time. This is one of the most useful questions an investigator can ask. Why did this decision make sense to the person at that moment? That question changes the investigation. Instead of simply asking why the pilot did something wrong, we start asking what information did they have? What were they trying to achieve? What options did they think were available? What pressures existed? What had they been trained to do? What was normal practice at that site? Were there organisational or cultural factors influenced the decision? That then brings us to the third point. Investigators must examine context. Context includes workload, weather, fatigue, training, supervision, procedures, communication, local norms, and operational pressure. Without context, we are not really investigating. We are just judging. A pilot's action may look unreasonable after the event, but when placed in its actual context, we may discover that another reasonable pilot could have made a similar decision. That is where learning is. If the problem was shaped by unclear procedures, weak supervision, poor training, normalised shortcuts, or operational pressure, then simply criticising the pilot will not fix the problem. And the final point is avoid simplistic judgment. Simplistic judgment is attractive because it gives us a quick answer. It says the pilot made a mistake. The instructor should have intervened. The crew should have known better. Sometimes those statements may be partly true, but they are rarely enough. A good investigation does not stop at the first obvious explanation. It keeps asking what conditions made the event possible. So when investigating, be very cautious with words like obvious, clearly, simply, or should have. Those words often signal that hindsight bias is entering the analysis. A more disciplined approach is to ask what cues were available at the time. When should the risk have become apparent? Would another pilot in the same circumstances have recognised it? Were there previous warning signs? Or was this behaviour unusual, or had it become normal? The key message from this slide is simple. We know the outcome, the pilot did not. Our job is to reconstruct the situation as it appeared at the time, not as it appears afterwards. That discipline is essential if investigations are going to be fair, credible, and useful. So now that we've discussed why investigations matter, let's turn our attention to SOAR itself. What is SOAR actually for? Many people think of SOAR as an online reporting system. Some think of it as a database. Others think of it as something that you use after an accident. In reality, SOAR is none of those things by itself. SOAR is a safety learning system. Everything you see on this slide supports that single idea. So I'd like to begin with the diagram on the right. Notice that safety learning sits in the center. Everything else revolves around it. That isn't accidental. It reminds us that reporting is not the end of the process. Reporting is simply the beginning. The cycle starts with capture. Nothing can be improved if the organisation doesn't know something has happened. That means occurrences need to be reported honestly and promptly. Not just accidents, near misses, unsafe situations, procedural problems, hazards, anything that may help the organisation understand where risk exists. If we don't capture the information, the opportunity to learn disappears. The next step is identify. Once information is collected, the organisation begins looking for patterns. Was this an isolated event? Has it happened before? Is it occurring at more than one club? Does it involve a particular type of operation? Are we beginning to see a trend? This is one of the greatest strengths of a central reporting system. A single club may only experience one event, but across an entire organisation, several similar reports may reveal a hazard that no individual club could recognise on its own. So once we've identified a problem, we move to improve. This is where the organisation asks, what should we change? Should procedures be revised? Does guidance need clarification? Should training be improved? Do supervisors require additional resources? Can equipment or operating practices be modified? The purpose is not simply to document the occurrence, the purpose is to make the system stronger. The next stage is analyse. This is where disciplined investigation takes place. Evidence is gathered, facts are verified, contributing factors are examined, and alternative explanations are considered. Good analysis is objective. It doesn't begin with a conclusion. It allows the evidence to lead the investigator towards the most likely explanation. And from analysis comes learning. This is where the investigation begins creating value. Lessons are shared, instructors change the way they brief students, clubs review local procedures, safety officers identify recurring themes, and committees gain a better understanding of operational risk. Learning is only valuable if it changes understanding. Finally, the cycle reaches prevent. This is the outcome we have been aiming for all along. The purpose of capturing information, identifying trends, improving systems, analysing evidence, and learning lessons is to reduce the likelihood of the next occurrence. That is why prevention completes the cycle. But notice something important. The arrows don't stop there. The process is circular. Once improvements have been made, new information continues to be captured. The organisation continues to learn. The cycle never really ends. Now let's look briefly at the points on the left side of the slide. The first is capture safety information. That sounds simple, but is the foundation of everything else. No information means no learning. Second is identify trends and hazards. This shifts our thinking away from isolated events and towards organisational patterns. The third is improve operational systems. That reminds us that investigations should improve the way the organisation operates, not simply explain why it happened. The fourth point is support SMS analysis. SOAR provides information that feeds directly into the safety management system. Without occurrence reporting, the SMS becomes largely reactive rather than proactive. The fifth point is organisational learning. Individual experience becomes organisational knowledge. Lessons learned by one pilot or one club can benefit everyone. And finally, support future prevention. So that is why SOAR exists. Not to produce reports, not to assign blame, not to satisfy administration. Its purpose is to help prevent the next accident. So whenever someone asks, why should I bother reporting this? The answer is simple. Because today's report may become tomorrow's safety improvement. And tomorrow's safety improvement may prevent the next accident. That is the real purpose of SOAR. So let's now look at how the SOAR process works in practice. There is often a misunderstanding that submitting a SOAR report means you are personally beginning a full investigation. That is not how the system is intended to work. The workflow shown here is 6 stages. The first stage is initial notification. This is where someone advises that an occurrence has happened. At this stage, the report does not need to be perfect. It does not need to identify the cause. It does not need to contain every witness statement. It does not need to answer every question. Its purpose is simply to notify the organisation that something has occurred. Think of it as opening the door to a safety process. The second stage is early review. Once the report is received, it is reviewed to understand the nature of the event. At this point, the organisation asks several questions. How serious is this? Is anyone injured? Is there an immediate safety risk? Is evidence at risk of being lost? Does the occurrence need urgent support? Are external notifications required? Does the event need club level management, regional involvement, a level 3 investigator, or higher level oversight? This early review is important because not every occurrence needs the same response. Some events are simple and can be handled locally. Others require more structured investigation. The third stage is investigation allocation. This is where the appropriate investigator or investigation team is assigned. That allocation should be based on the nature, seriousness, and complexity of the event. A minor occurrence may be managed by the club. A more significant occurrence may require a level 3 investigator or regional support. A serious accident may require a much higher level of oversight and coordination with external agencies. The important point is that the person submitting the initial notification is not expected to make all of those decisions alone. The system helps allocate the occurrence to the right level. The fourth stage is fact gathering. This is where the investigation really begins. Evidence is collected, witnesses are spoken to, documents are reviewed, photographs are obtained, Radio recordings, flight logs, GPS traces, maintenance information, or training records may be examined where relevant. At this stage, the investigator's job is not to prove a theory. The job is to understand what happened as accurately as possible. This is why early notification matters so much. If the initial report is delayed, then by the time fact gathering begins, evidence may already have degraded or disappeared. The fifth stage is summary reporting. Once the evidence has been gathered and analysed, the investigation needs to be documented. A good summary report should clearly distinguish between facts, analysis, findings, and recommendations. It should explain what happened, what contributed, and what can reasonably be learned. It should not be a collection of speculation. It should not be written to protect reputations, and it should not be written simply to confirm an early assumption. And the final stage is review and learning. This is the stage that gives the entire process its value. The report is reviewed, findings are considered, lessons are shared, procedures may be improved, training may be updated, safety messages may be circulated, and operational expectations may be reinforced. Sometimes the review may conclude that no further action is required. That can also be a valid outcome. But the organisation should always ask, what have we learned? Could this happen again? Is there anything we can do to reduce the risk? So the key message at the bottom of this slide is that timely reporting protects people and improves outcomes. Early notification enables support, it helps preserve evidence, it allows the right level of investigation to be allocated, and it strengthens safety learning. So when you think about SOAR, do not think of it as a single report. Think of it as a workflow. Notification starts the process, review determines the response, allocation gives responsibility, fact gathering builds understanding, summary reporting records the learning, and review turns that learning into safer operations. That is how the SOAR process actually works. So now that we've looked at the reporting process, let's consider why that process sometimes breaks down. In my experience, most reporting failures are not caused by lack of commitment to safety. They are usually caused by good people making understandable decisions under pressure. There are 6 common reporting problems worth recognising, and I suspect every one of us has seen at least one of them. So let's work through them one by one. The first is waiting too long. This is probably the most common problem. People often think, I'll report it after we've sorted everything out, or I'll wait until I know exactly what happened. Unfortunately, evidence doesn't wait. Witnesses go home, aircraft are moved, weather changes, photographs aren't taken, people begin discussing the occurrence, memories start changing almost immediately. Every hour that passes makes the investigation slightly harder. That's why we emphasise reporting early, even if some information is still missing. The second problem is waiting for perfect information. This is a trap that catches many conscientious people. They genuinely want to submit a good report, so they keep delaying it while they collect one more fact, one more witness statement, one more photograph, one more explanation. But investigations rarely begin with perfect information. In fact, uncertainty is completely normal. A good initial report might simply say, this is what we know at present. At present, these matters remain uncertain. Further information will follow. That is exactly what investigators expect. Remember, the purpose of notification is to start the process, not to finish the investigation. The third problem is premature conclusions. This is one of the most damaging mistakes an investigator can make. As soon as we think we found the answer, our brain starts looking for evidence that supports it. At the same time, we become less sensitive to information that points in another direction. That's confirmation bias. For example, if we decide early that an occurrence was caused by poor pilot judgment, we may stop looking carefully at the operating environment, supervision, training, workload, or local procedures. The investigation becomes narrower than it should be, and professional investigators deliberately risk that temptation. They gather evidence first, then they develop conclusions, and the fourth problem is poorly structured reports. A good report separates 4 different things. First, the facts, second, the observations, third, the analysis, and finally, the recommendations. Those are not interchangeable. For example, the glider landed 150 metres beyond the normal touchdown point. That is a fact. The pilot misjudged the approach. That's an interpretation. Circuit training should be reviewed. That's a recommendation. If we mix all these together, the report comes difficult to read, difficult to review, and difficult to learn from. Good structure leads to good investigation. The fifth problem is confusing notification with investigation. This links directly to the previous slide. Notification is simply saying an occurrence has happened. Investigation is the process of understanding why. Those two are different activities. People sometimes delay reporting because they think they have to complete the investigation before they can submit the notification. In reality, the opposite is true. The notification should occur first, then the investigation begins, and the final problem is emotional reactions. This is often overlooked. After an occurrence, people may be shocked. They may feel guilty. They may be embarrassed. They may be worried about criticism, or they may simply be overwhelmed by everything happening around them. Those emotional responses are completely normal, but they can affect decision making. People may minimize the event. They may exaggerate parts of it. They may avoid reporting because they fear the consequences, or they may rush to explain what happened before they have all the facts. One of the roles of a good investigation process is to provide structure when emotions are high. The process slows us down. It reminds us to document facts rather than assumptions. It reminds us to report before evidence is lost. And it reminds us that learning is always more valuable than speculation. So if you remember only one thing from this slide, let it be this: report early. Don't wait for perfection. Don't decide the answer before you've gathered the evidence. Keep facts separate from opinions and let the investigation process do what it is designed to do. Those simple disciplines make investigations fairer, more objective, and ultimately far more valuable to the organisation. We now come to one of the most important concepts in modern aviation safety. What is a just culture? The term is often misunderstood. Some people hear just culture and think it means no accountability. Others think it means always supporting the pilot regardless of what happened. Neither is correct. A just culture is about fairness. It recognises that people make mistakes, that organisations influence behaviour, and that not every unsafe action should be treated in the same way. Let's start with the points on the left. First, just culture encourages reporting. People report more honestly when they believe the organisation will try to understand the event before judging them. Second, it balances fairness and accountability. It does not remove accountability. If someone knowingly disregards a significant risk, the organisation must respond. But accountability should follow understanding, not replace it. Third, it supports learning. The purpose is not simply to identify who made the last mistake. The purpose is to understand why the event became possible and how the system can be strengthened. Now look at the four categories on the right. An error is an unintended mistake. The person was trying to do things right, but something went wrong. Drift occurs when small deviations become normal over time. Adaptation occurs when people change practice to cope with real operational pressures. And recklessness is different. It involves conscious disregard of a substantial and known risk. Those categories matter because they guide the response. An honest error may require coaching or system improvement. Drift may require re-standardisation. Adaptation may require a review of whether procedures match operational reality. Recklessness may require firm accountability action. The key point is this: do not treat every unsafe action the same way. If we treat honest error as recklessness, reporting collapses. If we treat recklessness as honest error, standards erode. A just culture asks, what type of behaviour are we actually looking at? What context influenced it? And what response will improve safety? So the diagram this diagram helps us distinguish two processes that are often confused: safety investigation and discipline. At first glance, investigation and discipline can appear similar. Both happen after an occurrence. Both involve gathering information. Both may involve speaking to the people involved. But as this slide shows, they have completely different purposes. So let's start with the blue panel on the left. This is the safety investigation. Notice that every point is focused on learning. The first point says learning focused. The objective is to understand what happened and why. We're not trying to decide who deserves blame. We're trying to understand the sequence of events, the decisions that were made, and the factors that influenced those decisions. The second point is prevention focused. Everything we discover should help reduce the likelihood of a similar occurrence happening again. If the investigation doesn't improve future safety, we've missed its primary purpose. The third point is systems focused. This is one of the biggest changes in modern aviation safety. Rather than stopping with the individual, investigators ask wider questions. Were the procedures adequate? Was the training appropriate? Was supervision effective? Were there organisational pressures? Were hazards recognised? Could the system have done more to support the individual? Those questions often produce far greater safety improvements than simply identifying the final human error. Now, if we look across to the red panel, this represents discipline. Notice how different the focus is. The first point is conduct focused. Discipline is concerned with the person's behaviour. Did they comply with organisational expectations? Did they deliberately disregard procedures? Did they knowingly accept unacceptable risk? The second point is accountability focused. Here the organisation considers whether standards, policies or regulatory requirements have been breached. That is an entirely legitimate organisational responsibility. But it is a difficult question from the one asked during a safety investigation. Finally, discipline considers intentional behaviour. Was the behaviour deliberate? Was it reckless? Was there conscious disregard for safety? Those questions are generally outside the scope of the safety investigation itself. Now look at the centre of the slide. The large not equal symbol is very deliberate. It reminds us that these are not the same process. The text underneath reinforces the point. Different purposes, different questions, both are important. Neither process is more important than the other. Aviation needs both. We need investigations to improve safety. We also need accountability when standards have been knowingly ignored. The mistake is allowing one process to interfere with the other. If investigators begin looking for someone to punish, people will become reluctant to report. Witnesses become guarded. Important information may never be disclosed. Learning suffers. Conversely, if organisations refuse to deal with genuine reckless behaviour because they are afraid of appearing punitive, standards will gradually erode. So both processes are necessary, but each must remain true to its own purpose. And finally, look at the statement across the bottom of the slide. It summarises the whole concept beautifully. Clear separation enables open reporting, quality investigations and fair outcomes. That's really the key message. People are much more likely to report honestly when they know the investigation is genuinely trying to understand what happened. And if the investigation later identifies evidence of deliberate misconduct, that information can be considered through the appropriately disciplinary process, not by changing the purpose of the investigation itself. So whenever you're involved in an occurrence, remember this diagram and ask yourself, am I trying to understand the event so we can improve safety? Or am I considering whether conduct requires management action? Both are legitimate questions, but they belong in different processes. Keeping that distinction clear is one of the foundations of an effective safety management system. So now that we've discussed the difference between safety investigation and discipline, let's look at common problems in club investigations. These problems are not signs of bad clubs. They are examples of normal human behaviour under pressure. The first problem is the question at the top. Who caused this? It seems natural, but it narrows the investigation too early. It focuses attention on one person before we have understood the wider system. A better starting point is what happened, and then how did this happen? The second problem is rumour and speculation. In clubs, information travels quickly. Someone heard a radio call, someone saw part of the circuit, someone spoke to the pilot. Very quickly, a story forms before evidence has been collected. Once that story becomes accepted, witnesses may unconsciously reshape their recollections to fit it. The third issue is reputation protection. People naturally want to protect their club. respected instructors, and experienced pilots. That is understandable, but if reputation protection becomes more important than safety learning, the investigation loses value. Next is pilot error blame storming. This is where we identify the pilot's final action and stop there. Pilot error may be part of the story, but it's rarely the whole story. Good investigators also ask about workload, culture, procedures, supervision, and the operating environment. Finally, there is selective evidence use. Once we form an early opinion, we naturally notice evidence that supports it and discount evidence that challenges it. That is confirmation bias. Good investigators actively ask, what evidence contradicts my current thinking? Have I considered alternate explanations? The message across the bottom brings it together. Good investigations stay open, follow the evidence, and focus on learning. The goal is understanding and improvement, not blame. So unsafe behaviour often develops gradually rather than suddenly. Most unsafe behaviour in aviation does not begin with someone consciously deciding to be reckless. It often evolves over time. People adapt, small shortcuts appear, nothing bad happens. Others copy the shortcut. Eventually the practice becomes normal. Let's start with the concepts on the left. Operational adaptation occurs when people adjust methods to cope with real-world pressure. Workload, weather, time pressure, traffic, limited resources, or local site constraints. Adaptation is not automatically bad, but it becomes risky when a workaround quietly replaces the intended standard without anyone assessing the risk. Procedural drift occurs when small deviations from procedure become accepted and expected. At first, the deviation seems minor. Later, it becomes just how we do things here. Normalisation of deviance occurs when increasingly risky practices stop raising concern because nothing bad has happened previously. Informal unsafe norms are the unwritten rules that develop socially, such as tolerating shortcuts when traffic is heavy or when a retrieve would be inconvenient. The result is erosion of safety margins. So now look at the diagram on the right. It shows the movement from intended standards to small deviations to accepted practice to widespread acceptance and finally to an incident or accident. The important point is that each step may seem reasonable at the time. That is why drift can be difficult to recognise from inside the organisation. So when investigating, ask, was this an isolated action or part of a pattern? Had similar behaviour been tolerated before? Had actual practice drifted away from the written standard? If the problem is drift, correcting one pilot will not fix it. The organisation must understand how the drift developed and restore safe margins. So we're now going to apply the just culture categories to a practical gliding scenario. So a glider is established and final approach and committed to land. A second glider returns from the training area lower than expected. Instead of joining behind established traffic, it flies a shortened diagonal join across the inside of the circuit and turns into close final ahead of the first glider. This places the second glider between the first glider and its intended landing area. The first pilot has limited options because of height, position, energy, state, wind, other traffic, and available landing area. To maintain separation, the first pilot alters the approach and landing point, resulting in a rushed and less stable landing. The second pilot later says they believed there was enough space and were trying to get back to the normal landing area near the launch point. They acknowledged they could have modified the circuit area and landed longer, but they were focused on fitting in and avoiding an inconvenient retrieve. Other pilots say similar non-standard joins and short approaches have occasionally been tolerated when traffic is heavy. So before we discuss this, take about 30 seconds to decide where you would initially place this behaviour. Was it honest error? Was it procedural drift? Was it operational adaptation? Was it poor judgment or reckless behaviour? So what I'd like you to do is in the chat space, put down who sees this mainly as honest error, who sees it as procedural drift or operational adaptation, who sees it as poor judgment or reckless behaviour. And when you've done that, I'll get I'll get Dave to tell me what the consensus of opinion is.
So just waiting there in the chat room to see if anybody can type in what they think. Getting there. Okay, getting there. Have we got any more to come? Okay, Chris, the majority.
Okay, what have we got?
The majority of them are definitely drift. Was there as procedural drift?
Yep.
Was definitely a high one, and also adaptation.
Yep.
And that seemed to be the other most common one of there. Some people, brought out that it's, could be all of the above, but those two are the main ones.
Yeah, correct. So the thing that people need to consider is, what facts led you to that conclusion? What else would you need to know? Would your review change if this had happened before? Would your review change if the pilot had previously been counselled? Would your view change if similar shortcuts had become normal practice? Would your view change if the pilot saw the first glider and continued anyway? The point is that the appropriate response depends on behaviour, context, and learning opportunity. So an honest error may require coaching. Drift may require restandardisation. Adaptation may require reviewing whether procedures fit the real operating environment, or poor judgment may require retraining or supervision. And of course, recklessness may require a firm accountability response. So when we ask what response is appropriate, we're asking two questions. What is fair to the individual, and what will make the system safer? All right. So up until now, we've been talking about investigation principles. Now we'll turn to the first few minutes after an occurrence. In the first few minutes after an occurrence or serious incident, you may not primarily be an investigator. You are responding to an emergency. There are 4 immediate priorities. First, protect people. If someone's injured, nothing else matters until immediate threats to life are addressed. Provide first aid if trained and safe to do so. Call emergency services if required, and prevent further harm to occupants, rescuers, and bystanders. Second, stabilise the situation. Accident scenes can remain hazardous. Fuel may be leaking, aircraft may be unstable, vehicles may be arriving, and bystanders may gather. The aim is to prevent the accident scene becoming more dangerous or more confused. Third, preserve evidence. Notice that evidence preservation comes third, not first. Once people are safe and the scene is stable, leave things as they are where possible. Avoid moving, cleaning up, or repairing anything unnecessarily. If something must be moved for safety or rescue, record what changed and why. Fourth, notify appropriate people. Once the immediate response is under control, follow club procedures and make the necessary notifications. The initial notification simply says an occurrence has happened. The investigation comes afterwards. Now look at the right-hand panel. Life first. Evidence preservation must never compromise rescue or emergency response. If wreckage has to be moved to rescue someone, move it. If restraints have to be cut, cut them. No investigator will criticise someone for saving a life. The key sequence is simple. People first, make the scene safe, then preserve evidence, then notify the appropriate people. So the first immediate response priority is simple. Protect people first. That means our first priority is preserving life. Not photography, not investigation, not paperwork, life. Let's work through the practical actions that support that priority. The first item is first aid. If someone is injured, assess the situation and provide immediately first aid within your capability. That may include controlling bleeding, maintaining an airway, keeping someone still, providing reassurance, or simply staying with the injured person until help arrives. Do what you are trained and able to do, but don't go beyond your competence. The second item is emergency services. Call for help early. Do not wait until the situation becomes obviously serious. When calling emergency services, provide clear information: where the accident is, how access can be gained, how many people are injured, what injuries are apparent, and whether there are hazards such as fuel, fire, batteries, wreckage, terrain, or ballistic recovery systems. Clear information helps emergency services arrive prepared. The third item is fire risk. Aircraft accident sites may involve fuel, electrical systems, hot components, or damaged batteries. If it is safe to do so, identify fire risks and control ignition sources. Use extinguishers only if you are trained and it is safe to do so. The fourth item is fuel hazards. Fuel spills, leaks, and vapours can create serious risk even when there is no visible fire. Keep people away from spills. Prevent smoking, sparks, or other ignition sources. Treat the area as hazardous until it has been assessed. The fifth item is site safety. Secure the area, control access, warn others of hazards. Aircraft accident sites can include unstable wreckage, sharp composite materials, damaged batteries, live electrical systems, difficult terrain, and ballistic parachute or ballistic recovery systems. Treat any ballistic recovery system as potentially hazardous until made safe by appropriately trained personnel. The final item is rescuer safety, and this is critical. People naturally want to help, but rescuers can become casualties themselves if they rush in without assessing the hazards. Do not become another casualty. Pause, look, think, and then act. The right-hand panel reinforces the same message. The message is deliberately simple. Life first. Not photography, not investigation, not paperwork, life. The checklist reinforces the key principles, key priorities. Protect injured people, call for help early, control immediate hazards, protect rescuers, and stay calm and work as a team. Preparation matters. Training, planning, and clear roles make a critical difference. And the key message is this: in the first moments after an accident, think first like a rescuer, not an investigator. Protect people, call for help, control hazards, protect yourself and the team. Everything else comes afterwards. Once immediately life threats have been addressed, the next priority is to stabilise the situation. This does not mean the investigation has become more important than people. It means that once people are safe, we need to prevent the scene from becoming more dangerous, more confused, or less useful for later investigation. So let's work through the practical steps. The first point is secure the aircraft. If it is safe to do so, shut down systems, secure the aircraft against movement, and prevent further deterioration. That might mean ensuring switches are safe, isolating systems if trained and appropriate, or preventing the aircraft from moving in wind or uneven terrain. Only do what is safe and within your capability. The second point is prevent secondary damage. After an accident, further damage can occur very easily. Weather may affect wreckage. People may walk through the scene. Vehicles may drive across marks. Parts may be moved. Well-intentioned people may try to tidy up. The aim is to prevent unnecessary further damage or interference. The third point is control access. This is one of the most important practical steps. Establish a reasonable safety perimeter. Keep unnecessary people out. Restrict access to those who have a clear role, such as first aiders, emergency services, authorised club personnel, or investigators. This protects people, but it also protects the evidence. The fourth point is manage bystanders. People naturally gather after an accident. Most are trying to help or understand what happened, but uncontrolled bystanders can create confusion, disturb evidence, spread speculation, or interfere with emergency operations. Keep people at a safe distance. Provide factual updates only. Avoid opinions, rumours, or explanations before the facts are known. The fifth point is preserve evidence where possible. This means do not move or disturb anything unless it is necessary for safety or rescue. If something must be moved, record what was moved, when it was moved, and why. Photograph the scene if it is safe to do so. Document the scene as you find it. Now look at the right-hand panel. The do this list is the behaviour we want. Act calmly and methodically. Follow procedures. Communicate clearly. Document actions. The last point is important. If actions are taken at the scene, write them down. Later investigators need to know what changed after the accident. Now compare that with the not this list. Do not move wreckage unnecessarily. Do not remove or discard items. Do not speculate or share opinions. And do not allow uncontrolled access. These are common problems after accidents, and they usually happen because people are trying to help. But good intentions can still damage evidence and confuse the investigation. This becomes especially important during serious or fatal accidents where police, ATSB, CASA, emergency services, or coronial authorities may become involved. In those circumstances, disciplined scene management is essential. The key message at the bottom of the slide brings this together. Professional scene management shows discipline, protects evidence quality, and supports a thorough investigation. So the practical message is simple. Once people are safe, slow the scene down. Control access, prevent unnecessary movement, manage bystanders, record what happens, keep the scene orderly until the appropriate people take over. So once the scene is stabilised, the next priority is timely reporting. The central message is simple. Report early, report honestly. So let's start with the left-hand side of the slide. Reportable occurrences may include accidents. These are events involving serious injury, fatality, or significant damage to the aircraft or property. They may include serious ground accidents, flight accidents, major aircraft damage, or any event where the consequences are clearly significant. The next category is serious incidents. These are events that had the potential to cause accidents, even if the final outcome was less serious. That distinction matters. We should not judge reporting only by what actually happened. We should also consider what could reasonably have happened. The third category is airspace events. That includes airspace infringements, near mid-airs, or loss of separation. These events are particularly important because they often reveal issues with lookout, radio communication, circuit discipline, traffic sequencing, or situational awareness. The fourth category is structural damage. Any damage affecting the strength or integrity of the aircraft should be treated seriously. Even if the aircraft appears serviceable at first glance, structural damage needs proper assessment and reporting. The fifth category is injuries. Any injury requiring medical treatment should be reported. That includes injuries during flight operations, launch operations, towing, ground handling, retrieving, maintenance activity, or movement around the airfield. And the final category is dangerous occurrences. This is deliberately broad. It means any event affecting the safety of operations. So if something occurred that created real risk, even if nobody was injured and nothing was damaged, it may still need to be reported. Now look at the panel on the right. The first message is report early. Prompt reporting improves safety outcomes and reduces risk. Delayed reporting is one of the most common weaknesses in investigations. People may assume someone else has already reported the event. They may be unsure whether it is serious enough, or they may be embarrassed, stressed, or emotionally affected. But delay creates problems. Evidence degrades, memories fade, support is delayed, and escalation pathways may be compromised. The next message is, if uncertain, report. This is very important. You do not need perfect information before making an initial notification. The report can be updated later. The first report simply begins the organisational awareness and support. It allows the right people to decide what level of response is required. And finally, the panel says, report first, details later. That is the practical rule. Do not wait until you have completed the investigation. Do not wait until every witness has been spoken to. Do not wait until everyone agrees on what happened. Submit the initial report, clearly identify what is known and what remains uncertain, and update it as more information becomes available. The bottom banner summarises the slide. Report early, report honestly. Your report could help prevent the next accident. So the key takeaway is this. When in doubt, report early and seek guidance. It is far better to submit an early preliminary report than to lose evidence, delay support, or miss an opportunity to learn. So we've now looked at when to report and what should be reported. Let's consider why reporting systems sometimes fail. The first issue is waiting too long. People may be unsure whether an event is serious enough, or they may want more information first. But time is the enemy of evidence. Witnesses leave, memories fade, and the scene changes. The second issue is incomplete information. Earlier reports will often be incomplete. That is acceptable if the report clearly separates known facts from uncertain details. An incomplete report can be updated later. A missing report can't. The third issue is emotional reactions. After a serious event, people may be shocked, embarrassed, distressed, or overwhelmed. That is human. Procedures help people act calmly when emotions are high. The fourth issue is poor scene coordination. If no one takes charge, tasks are duplicated, assumptions are made, and important actions may be missed. The fifth issue is assuming others reported. This is diffusion of responsibility. Everyone assumes someone else made the call or submitted the report, and sometimes nobody has. The final issue is delayed escalation. Sometimes clubs try to manage increasingly serious events locally when independent support or oversight is needed. There is nothing unprofessional about asking for help early. The message at the bottom gives the practical answer. Report early, communicate clearly, escalate when in doubt. Good reporting saves time, supports learning, and helps prevent future accidents. So before we move on, I'd like to pause for a short operational reflection. This isn't a test, it's simply an opportunity to think about your own club or operating site. Look at the left-hand side of the slide. Imagine a serious accident has just occurred. You are now in the first 15 minutes. Not the written emergency plan, not what should happen in theory, what would actually happen at your club. So let's work through the questions. Who takes control? Who is the person everyone naturally looks to? Is that role formally allocated, or does it simply depend on who happens to be there? The next question is who contacts emergency service? Is it obvious who makes the call? Does that person know exactly where the access points are? Do they know what information emergency services will need? Or will several people assume somebody else has already called? The third question is who preserves evidence? Once the emergency response is underway, who is responsible for protecting the scene? Who ensures that unnecessary movement is avoided? Who starts recording what has been changed and why? The fourth question is who manages bystanders? Accident scenes naturally attract people. Someone needs to keep unnecessary people away, maintain safe perimeter, and prevent well-intentioned interference with the scene. Finally, who communicates externally? Who speaks with emergency services? Who communicates with the organisation? If necessary, who communicates with families, the ATSB, CASA, police, or the media? Most importantly, who ensures that only factual information is released? Just take a moment to think about your own organisation. So if you're comfortable doing so, I'd like you to respond in the chat. Would these roles be clear at your club? Yes, partly, or no? So, Dave, can you take control of that?
Yeah, sure, Chris. I've got that. So
yes, partly, or no. So would these roles be clear at your club? Yes, partly, or no? So we got any responses yet?
yeah, we've got lots. give me a minute or so.
Okay.
Seeing a lot of responses, and the majority response is that it's the partly.
Yep.
That's definitely that, followed by yes, and only very few no's at this particular point.
Well,
yeah, so definitely the partlies. I've got it.
Yeah. Okay, well, there are no right or wrong answers. The purpose isn't to compare clubs or criticise anyone. The purpose is to identify whether responsibilities are genuinely understood before they're needed. So many organisations discover during real emergency that everyone assumed someone else would take charge. Someone thought another person had called emergency services. Several people started giving directions. Nobody controlled access. People wandered into the accident site. Information began circulating before the facts were known. And these are very common human responses. They're not signs of poor people. They're signs of inadequate preparation. So look at the diagram on the right. Everything revolves around the first 15 minutes. Taking control, contacting emergency services, preserving evidence, managing bystanders, communicating externally. Those actions don't happen one after the other. They happen almost simultaneously. That's why preparation is so important. The final message across the bottom summarises the whole exercise. You need to have clear roles, calm actions, better outcomes, and preparation today protects lives tomorrow. So if your answer to this exercise was partly or no, don't see that as a failure. See it as a valuable safety information. It tells you exactly where your club can improve before the next emergency occurs. And if that's really what safety management is all about, identifying weakness before they become emergencies rather than after them. All right, we'll look at a little case study here. So we'll apply the same first 15 minutes thinking to a simpler but still important occurrence. So imagine this happens at your club. A glider is being moved on the ground. During handling, the wing strikes a ground crew member, causing an injury that requires medical attention. This may not be a major aircraft accident, but it is still exactly the kind of event where the first few minutes matter. On the left side of the slide, we can see 4 things that have gone wrong. The first is delayed emergency response. Emergency services were not called immediately. That may have happened because people thought the injury was minor or because everyone assumed someone else had already made the call. The second issue is poor scene control. People moved equipment and disturbed the scene. They may have done that with good intentions, trying to clear the area, move the glider, or get the operations back under control. But once equipment is moved, it becomes harder to understand what actually happened. The third issue is confused responsibilities. It was unclear who was in charge and what needed to be done. This is one of the most common problems in real occurrences. People want to help, but without coordination, several people may act at once while important tasks are missed. The fourth issue is escalating injuries. The injured person did not receive timely care. That is the most important consequence. So this slide is not about protecting the investigation ahead of the person. The injured person always comes first. But once first aid is underway, the scene still needs to be managed properly. So let's use this as a discussion exercise. The question at the bottom left are what failed and what should have happened. Take a moment to think about that. If you are comfortable, put one word or a short phrase in the chat. What is the most likely weakness here? Was it role clarity, emergency response, scene control, witness recollection, or communication? So over to you, Dave.
Sure thing.
Okay, so what is the most likely weakness? Was it role clarity, emergency response, scene control, witness recollection, or communication?
Okay, we're getting a clear one here about role clarity is definitely coming through as a big one.
Yep.
There's confused responsibility, a little bit of scene control as well.
Yep.
And the odd emergency response that's in there. Role
Okay.
clarity is the winner so far. Yep.
All right. Well, the answer is probably not people lack goodwill. Most people at clubs want to help. The problem is that no one was clearly coordinating the response. Once coordination is missing, other problems develop quickly. Emergency services may be delayed. Equipment may be moved unnecessarily. Witnesses may start discussing the event amongst themselves. Different people may begin giving different directions. External communication may start before anyone has clear understanding of what happened. A proportionate response would look different. Someone confirms that first aid is being provided. Someone calls emergency services if required. Someone keeps the area safe. Someone prevents equipment being moved unnecessarily. So if something must be moved for safety or first aid, someone records what was moved and when and why. Witnesses do not need to be formally isolated, but they should be discouraged from debating the details together before initial accounts are taken. The lesson is not that every ground handling incident needs to be treated like a major accident investigation. That would be excessive. The lesson is that even modest incidents can become much harder to understand if early response is disorganised. So the practical takeaway is this: look after the injured person first, prevent further harm, keep the scene under reasonable control, preserve enough information to understand what happened, make sure someone is clearly coordinating the response. And I know that in some club safety management systems or their emergency response plans, they've actually got little cards to coordinate roles for different people. And they're always a handy thing to allocate when you've had an accident or an incident at your club, so that people then know what their role is and that they can then act on it. So we'll now move from immediate response to the next stage of the process, fact gathering. The key objective here is not to prove a theory or confirm a likely cause. It is to understand reality as accurately as possible. That distinction is critical. One of the greatest risks in any investigation is that people form an early explanation and then start collecting information to support it. That is not investigation, that is confirmation. Good fact gathering does the opposite. It slows the process down. It asks, what do we actually know? What have we verified? What remains uncertain? What evidence might challenge our first impression? Now look down the left side of the slide. The first objective is gather accurate information. That means collecting facts from reliable sources using disciplined methods. Not rumours, not assumptions, not what people think probably happened. Facts. The second objective is preserve evidence. That includes both physical and digital evidence. Physical evidence might include aircraft position, damage, marks on the ground, control positions, switches, instruments, or environmental conditions. Digital evidence might include GPS traces, radio recordings, photos, flight logs, or electronic records. The third objective is avoid contamination. Evidence can be contaminated very easily. Aircraft can be moved. Witnesses can influence each other. Photographs can be taken after the scene has changed. Documents can be edited. People can unintentionally fill gaps with speculation. The investigator's job is to protect the evidence from alteration, disturbance, or loss wherever possible. The fourth objective is support objective analysis. Good analysis depends on reliable foundation. If the facts are poor, the analysis will be poor. If the evidence is incomplete, the conclusions may be incomplete. If the evidence is biased, the findings may be biased. The image on the right reinforces the point. We see the aircraft scene being photographed, evidence markers in place, and an evidence log being used. That is the mindset we want: calm, methodical, and disciplined. Finally, look at the banner across the bottom. Good evidence leads to good analysis, and the quality of analysis can never exceed the quality of evidence collected. That is the key lesson from this slide. Experienced investigators often spend considerable time gathering and checking information before discussing conclusions in detail. That is not delay, that is discipline. So as we move into the evidence section, remember this principle: gather facts first, protect evidence, avoid contamination, let the analysis come later. So now that we've discussed fact gathering, let's look at the different evidence types investigators use. The first is physical evidence. This includes aircraft condition, impact marks, switches, controls, instruments, and environmental conditions. Physical evidence is valuable because it does not rely on memory. It can show what existed at the scene, but it does not always explain why it happened. The second category is documentary evidence. This includes maintenance records, flight logs, training records, GPS data, radio logs, and photographs. These records help establish timelines, verify accounts, and preserve details that may later disappear. The third category is human evidence. This includes witness observations, pilot statements, instructor observations, and operational recollections. Human evidence is important because people can explain decisions, intentions, and context that no photograph or document can capture. But it also requires care. Look at the message across the bottom. All evidence types have strengths and limitations. No single source tells the whole story. A good investigation compares physical evidence, documentary evidence, and human evidence, looking for consistency and gaps. The second message is especially important. Human memory is fallible and vulnerable to contamination and hindsight reconstruction. Memory is not a video recording. It can be influenced by later conversations, rumours, assumptions, and the way questions are asked. That is why we obtain witness accounts early, separately where practical, and using open questions. The investigator's job is to assemble these evidence types carefully before moving to analysis. One of the most underestimated investigation skills is witness interviewing. Many people assume that interviewing a witness simply means asking what happened. But witness evidence is fragile. Human memory does not work like a video recording. People do not simply replay events exactly as they occurred. Memory is reconstructive, and it can be influenced by stress, later conversations, assumptions, rumours, and the way questions are asked. What many people don't realise is that the brain doesn't simply retrieve a memory each time we recall an event. It reconstructs it. Every conversation, every theory, every new piece of information, and every retelling has the potential to subtly reshape that memory. Over time, the witness's recollection can move further from the original experience, yet still feel completely accurate and genuine to them. That is one of the reasons investigators place such importance on obtaining independent witness accounts as early as practicable. That is why the slide contrasts good interview practice with poor practice. So let's start on the left-hand side. Good interview practice begins with calm environment. Where possible, speak to witnesses away from the noise and emotion of the accident scene. The aim is to reduce pressure, not increase it. The next point is open questions. Ask questions such as, what did you see? What did you hear? What happened next? Avoid pushing the witness towards an answer. The third point is minimal interruption. Let the witness tell the story in their own words. If we interrupt too early, we may accidentally steer their recollection or cause them to leave out useful details. The fourth point is record exact wording. This matters because small changes in wording can change meaning. If a witness says, I think I heard the launch call, do not record that as the witness heard the launch call. Those are different statements. Now look at the right-hand side of the slide. This shows poor practice. The first problem is leading questions. For example, you saw the glider turn too low, didn't you? That question already suggests the answer. A better question would be, what did you observe about the glider's turn? The next problem is group interviews. Group discussions can contaminate memory very quickly. People hear other versions of the event and may unconsciously incorporate those details into their own recollection. That is why witnesses should be spoken to separately where practical. The next problem is suggesting answers. Even subtle suggestions can influence recall. If the interviewer says, was the pilot rushing? The witness may begin interpreting the event through that frame, even if they had not thought that originally. And finally, avoid public speculation. Speculation around the clubhouse or launch point can quickly become accepted as fact. People begin saying, I heard that, or apparently, and the original observations become mixed with rumour. So the key message from this slide is simple. Interview witnesses calmly, ask open questions, let people speak in their own words, record what they actually say, avoid group discussion, leading questions, and speculation. Good witness interviewing protects the quality of human evidence. Poor interviewing can unintentionally damage it before the investigation has even begun. So we'll now turn to one of the core disciplines of investigation, preserving objectivity. By this stage of an investigation, we may already have physical evidence, documents, and witness accounts, but evidence alone is not enough. Investigators also need discipline in how they think about that evidence. So let's start with the left-hand side of the slide. The first point is facts first. That means conclusions must be based on verified information, not beliefs, impressions, or early opinions. It is perfectly normal to develop an initial sense of what may have happened, But that initial sense is not a finding. A finding must be supported by evidence. The second point is separate observations from opinions. This is one of the most important investigation disciplines. Record what was seen, heard, or recorded, not what you think it means. For example, the glider impacted short of the runway is an observation. The pilot misjudged the approach is an interpretation. Those statements are very different. And the third point is avoid assumptions. If there is a gap in the evidence, don't fill it with speculation. It is better to say we do not know than to create a neat but unsupported explanation. The fourth point is avoid hindsight bias. Do not judge decisions using knowledge gained afterwards. The question is not what seems obvious now. The question is what information was available at the time. The fifth point is avoid confirmation bias. Once we have a theory, we tend to notice evidence that supports it and discount evidence that challenges it. Good investigators actively look for alternative explanations. So if we look at the graphic on the right, the scales show the distinction between observations and interpretations. Observations describe what happened. They are based on what was seen, heard, or recorded. Interpretations explain what it might mean, but interpretations must always be tested against the evidence. The 4 warning symbols underneath reinforce the behaviour we need to avoid. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't let emotions influence judgment. Don't seek only confirming evidence, and don't be influenced by others. This is especially important in club environments where people may know each other well and early opinions can spread quickly. Finally, look at the banner at the bottom. Good investigators remain open-minded and willing to revise theories as evidence evolves. That is the key message. Changing your view when new evidence emerges is not weakness. It is good investigation practice. Objectivity means staying neutral, letting the evidence speak, and being prepared to adjust your conclusions when the evidence requires it. So we've just talked about good interviewing techniques. Now let's see why they matter. I'd like you to look at the picture before reading the text. What appears to be happening here? At first glance, it looks like a perfectly normal conversation between club members after an occurrence. Nobody appears to be arguing. Nobody appears to be trying to mislead anyone. In fact, it looks like an ordinary discussion that could happen at any club. But that is exactly why this example matters. Now look at the speech bubbles. One person says, I think it happened here. Another replies, I heard it was much closer to the fence. Someone else says, someone said the pilot didn't see the wires. Another responds, that must be what really happened. And finally, yes, that makes sense. Now ask yourself, has anyone deliberately lied? Probably not. Has anyone intended to contaminate the evidence? Again, probably not. What we're seeing is something much more common. We're watching individual memories gradually become a shared story. Now look at the left-hand side of the slide. The witness recollections changed after 4 very normal human behaviours. First, group discussion. People naturally want to compare what they saw. Second, rumour. Someone repeats something they heard from another person. Third, we've got speculation. People begin filling gaps in the story with what they think probably happened. And finally, social pressure. Once a common explanation begins to emerge, people naturally start questioning their own memory. Instead of asking, what did I actually see? They begin asking, does my memory fit everyone else's? This is not dishonesty, it is a normal human psychology. So now look at the sequence across the bottom of the slide. It starts with the original independent memory. That memory is influenced by discussion. Discussion introduces rumours. Rumours encourage speculation. Speculation creates social pressure. Eventually, everyone's memory begins to converge into a single contaminated version of events. Notice the important point. The final story may be agreed by everyone, but agreement does not necessarily mean it is accurate. This is why investigators must try to speak with witnesses individually and as early as practicable. The objective isn't to stop people talking forever. That would be unrealistic. The object is to capture each person's independent recollection before it becomes influenced by everyone else's. Finally, look at the message across the bottom of the slide. Capture early, capture independently, preserve accuracy. That's really the whole lesson. Human memory is reconstructive and vulnerable to influence. The earlier we obtain independent witness accounts, the more likely we are to preserve what each person actually saw, heard, and experienced. That gives investigators much stronger foundation for understanding what really happened. Now, small aviation communities create a very real investigation challenge, conflict of interest. In a club environment, investigations rarely occur at arm's length. People know each other, they fly together, they instruct each other, they supervise each other, they sit on committees together. That means conflicts of interest can arise very easily, even when everyone involved is acting honestly. So let's look at the list on the left-hand side of the slide. The very first is friends. If the person involved in an occurrence is a close friend, it may be difficult to remain completely objective. You may unconsciously soften the language, avoid difficult questions, or give more weight to their explanation. The second is students. If you trained the pilot involved, you may feel personally responsible. You may want to defend the training, protect the student, or avoid findings that reflect on your own instruction. The third is committee members. If the occurrence involves someone with influence in the club, people may feel pressure, spoken or unspoken, to handle the matter carefully. That can affect openness and confidence in the investigation. The fourth is emotional involvement. This can apply in many situations. If someone is injured, distressed, embarrassed, or well-liked, it is natural to feel emotionally involved, but emotion can influence judgment. The fifth is reputation concerns. Sometimes the conflict is not about one person. It is about protecting the club, the operation, the instructor group, or the organisation's public image. This can be just as damaging. And the final item is perceived bias. This is especially important. An investigator may be completely fair and professional, but if others reasonably believe the investigation is not independent, trust can still be damaged. Perceived bias can undermine confidence almost as much as actual bias. Now look at the graphic. The investigator is surrounded by relationships and pressure. Friends, students, groups, reputation, fairness, facts. The image reminds us that investigators are not operating in isolation. They are part of the same social system that they may be investigating. That is why self-awareness matters. The banner at the bottom gives the practical lesson. Conflicts of interest and perceived bias can undermine trust and the integrity of an investigation. So the response is declare, manage, and escalate. That means declare the conflict, manage it transparently, and escalate the investigation when independence may be compromised. That does not mean every conflict makes someone unsuitable, but it does mean the issue should be recognised openly. In some cases, the investigator may simply need oversight. In other cases, a different investigator may be required. For more serious or sensitive matters, independent investigation support may be essential. The key message is this: people must trust the investigation process. If they do not trust the process, they will not report openly. They will not cooperate fully, and the organisation will lose learning. So when independence is in doubt, don't ignore it. Declare it early, manage it properly, and escalate when needed. So building on conflict of interest, we now turn to maintaining investigation credibility. Credibility matters because people will only support a safety investigation process if they trust it. If people believe an investigation is biased, unfair, secretive, or predetermined, confidence disappears very quickly. When that happens, reporting quality declines. People become guarded. Witnesses become less open, and organisational learning suffers. Let's start with the left-hand side of the slide. The first requirement is transparency. That means communicating the process, scope, and progress clearly. People do not need to know every detail of an investigation while it is underway, but they should understand what process is being followed, who is responsible, and what the investigation is trying to determine. The second requirement is independent review. Some investigations need oversight or review by someone sufficiently separate from the people or issues involved. This is especially important where relationships, club politics, instructor involvement, committee involvement, or reputational concerns may affect confidence in the process. The third requirement is early conflict declaration. Potential conflict should be identified early, not after someone raises concerns later. If an investigator has a personal, instructional, committee, or operational connection with the occurrence, that should be declared and managed. The fourth requirement is evidence-based analysis. Findings must be based on verified facts, not assumptions, opinions, or convenient explanations. Even if the evidence leads somewhere uncomfortable, the investigator must follow it. The fifth requirement is professional conduct. Investigators should act with integrity, respect, and professionalism at all times. That includes how they speak to witnesses, how they handle sensitive information, how they document evidence, and how they manage disagreement. Now look at the right side of the diagram. Credibility sits in the centre, protected by 5 supporting elements: trust, fairness, continuous improvement, objectivity, and transparency. Those are not separate ideas. They reinforce each other. Transparency supports trust. Objectivity supports fairness. Fairness supports reporting. Reporting supports learning. Learning supports continuous improvement. That is how investigation credibility becomes part of the wider safety system. Finally, look at the message across the bottom. Credible investigations build trust, strengthen reporting, and drive meaningful safety improvement. That is the key point. A credible investigation is not just one that reaches the right conclusion. It is one that people can trust because the process was fair, transparent, evidence-based, and professionally conducted. If people trust the process, they are more likely to report honestly next time. And that is what allows the organisation to keep learning. Human factors do not stop at the cockpit. They affect investigators as well as pilots. Investigators are human. That means we are vulnerable to assumptions, social pressure, cognitive shortcuts, and emotional reactions. Look at the traps on the left. Confirmation bias is a tendency to notice evidence that supports our existing theory and overlook evidence that challenges it. Hindsight bias makes the outcome seem obvious after the event. Authority bias means giving too much weight to the most senior or experienced person's view. Emotional involvement can occur when we know the people involved or care deeply about the organisation. And simplistic pilot error thinking is the trap of stopping once we identify the pilot's final action. Now look at the illustration on the right. All of these traps pull the investigator towards misleading conclusions. The answer is not to pretend we are immune. The answer is to manage the risk deliberately. Stay curious. Ask what evidence challenges your view. Follow the evidence and think systems, not blame. Modern safety investigation looks beyond the final action to training, supervision, procedures, operational pressure, culture, workload, environment, and communication. That wider view gives us a much better chance of preventing the next occurrence. So let's return to unsafe norms and operational drift, this time as an investigation lesson. Unsafe practices rarely appear suddenly. They usually develop gradually as organisations adapt to pressure. Look at the concepts on the left. Procedural drift occurs when small deviations from procedures become normal over time. Operational adaptation occurs when people introduce workarounds to manage real operational pressures. Social reinforcement occurs when others copy or accept the behaviour. Over time, safety margins erode. Eventually, normalisation of deviance occurs. What was once unacceptable becomes just how we do it. Now look at the graph on the right. Risk increases over time, while margins decrease. Small deviations become shortcuts. Shortcuts become common. Eventual risk is accepted as normal. The accident often appears sudden, but the conditions may have been developing for a long time. That is why investigators must look beyond the final pilot action. Ask about systems, operational pressure, communication, supervision, and leadership influence. Was the unsafe act truly isolated, or was it part of a wider pattern? If it was drift, the solution is not simply correcting one person. The organisation must understand how the unsafe norm developed and restore safe margins. Okay, so we've now reached the end of the first presentation. Tonight we've concentrated on what happens immediately after an occurrence and the foundations of good safety investigation. Rather than introducing anything new, I'd like to finish by revising the key themes shown on this slide. Let's start on the left. The first is preserve people first. Throughout the evening, we've reinforced that life and well-being always come before the investigation. If people need help, we help them. Evidence can usually be recovered. lives cannot. The second theme is preserve evidence early. Once the emergency is under control, disciplined scene management and careful evidence preservation make an enormous difference to the quality of the investigation. Good evidence is foundation of good analysis. The third theme is avoid premature conclusions. We've discussed how easy it is to jump to conclusions, particularly in close aviation communities. Good investigators remain curious. They gather facts first and allow the evidence to guide the investigation. The fourth theme is focus on learning. The purpose of an investigation is not simply to explain what happened. It is to understand why it happened and, most importantly, how we can reduce the chance of it happening again. That is how investigations improve safety. The fifth theme is maintain professionalism. Professionalism means acting with integrity, fairness, and respect. It means recognizing conflicts of interest, remaining objective, and treating everyone involved with dignity throughout the investigation. The final theme is support affected personnel. Occurrences affect people, pilots, instructors, ground crew, witnesses, families, club members. A professional investigation recognises that people may be distressed and ensures they are treated with care, compassion, and respect while still gathering the information needed to understand the event. Now look at the diagram on the right. Notice that all 6 themes surround a single central message. Good investigations save lives, improve safety, and strengthen our culture. That's why we investigate, not to assign blame, not to satisfy curiosity, but to learn, improve, and protect the people who fly after us. Everything we've discussed tonight supports one central goal: building a just and learning culture. We investigate, we learn, we improve. That is the continuous cycle of an effective safety management system. But tonight we've only examined the first stage of an investigation. We've looked at what happens immediately after an occurrence, protecting people, preserving evidence, reporting promptly, gathering facts objectively, and creating the conditions for a good investigation. Next time, we'll pick up where we leave off tonight. We'll move from asking what happened to asking the more important question, why did it happen? We'll explore how accidents develop through interacting human, operational, and organisational factors rather than a single mistake. We'll examine practical investigation tools, including system thinking and the Shell model. And we'll look at how good investigators identify meaningful safety improvements instead of simply identifying the last person to make an error. By the end of the second presentation, you'll see how disciplined investigation moves beyond collecting evidence to understanding why events occur and how that understanding helps prevent the next accident. Thank you for your attention during this first session. I hope you've come away with a better understanding of why disciplined investigations matter and how each of us contributes to building a stronger reporting culture and a safer gliding environment. I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We've got time for some questions and answers. So if you want to put them in the chat, I'll relay them to Chris so he can see that as we go forward. The training that we've just done now is really a first step in empowering our clubs, our CFIs, and helping to reduce our significant backlog that we've got of SOAR reports. We have still 300 plus reports that we've got to close, and early reporting has been great. We've done that well. The subsequent follow-up to ask more questions, to get more detail, usually ends up with, to be honest, crickets at the other end from the club's point of view. In my job, and as I delegated this to the RMOs and some level 3s to do this work, the follow-up to try and get that information back is really, really hard. And that leaves the report still open, or we close it with not the right amount of information brought in. We're hoping that doing this and doing this training, we can now let the clubs themselves work along the lines of filling in the gaps and doing the investigation as well. And that way we can keep this down. One of the steps we did at the operations panel meeting just in June, the RMOs and the operations panel agreed that they will work on the more recent reports, and we've got a goal of closing the ones that have happened in the last year as soon as possible. We do have reports still going back to 2.5, 3 years ago. We're trying to close those as well, but some people have moved on. some people aren't in gliding anymore, things like that. So we just have to try and close them up as best we can. So Leo asked the question. He said, we don't follow up, and we don't have a feedback loop of SOAR reports, and that's the fundamental reason why. A lot do get fed back, a lot do get closed, but we're not getting through the workload that we have. This training's here to help and to enable you. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat there now, and if there's none, we'll bring the meeting to a close, and I'll just watch to see if there's any more. Nothing in the chat, so that's good. Chris, you're off the hook now. Thank you once again, Chris. Thanks. For a great presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing next one, and we'll see everybody at the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all.